restoration is the practice of assisting ecosystem recovery where ecosystems have been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Ecosystem recovery helps sustain the diversity of life on Earth, including the relationship between people and planet. In this video, we'll explain the 6 key principles of ecological restoration using Scottsdale as a case study. Scottsdale is a Bush Heritage Australia reserve located 45 minutes south of Canberra. It protects critically endangered box gum grassy woodland and natural temperate grassland ecosystems. Phil Palmer is Regional Reserves Manager. He explains the overall goal of ecological restoration at Scottsdale.
We're looking at restoring the grassy box woodlands across the Scottsdale Reserve as best as we can, and that means enhancing its diversity, enhancing its structure and composition and health and function. And we're looking at engaging people in that activity and providing an example of how to restore degraded grasslands and degraded farmland. We can't just keep cutting further into the bush. I strongly believe that our future is in restoring what we've degraded and continuing to improve lands that have been lost.
The first principle of ecological restoration is adopting a reference ecosystem. An appropriate reference is used to set recovery targets and assess the success of an ecological restoration project. The reference is usually what exists or existed at the site, but in cases of permanent change, such as sea level rise or dryland salinity, other local ecosystems may be more appropriate. There are 6 attributes to consider for the reference ecosystem. The national standards explain these in detail. We'll just outline 2: community structure and ecosystem function. Community structure is the organisation of the system, including vegetation layers and food webs. They don't even have to be living. Structure includes rocks, fallen timber, and woody debris. Ecosystem function is the processes in the system. For example, the process of natural regeneration from native seed banks.
So if you're not getting your natives to seed and they're not dropping viable seed on the ground, then you haven't got restoration. It's as simple as that.
The second principle of ecological restoration is matching restoration techniques to the level of degradation at the site. This also means considering the ability of the ecosystem to recover by itself. Natural resilience is the ecosystem's ability to bounce back from disturbance.
The very first step is to identify which areas do self-regenerate, and that is the absolute bonus. But we've purchased this property knowing that much of it's gone under the plough for 150 years or more, and it needs some serious work. There's very little native resilience left.
The intensity of the techniques match the degradation of the site. For severely degraded sites, physical or chemical modifications may be required, and that takes a lot of work. For moderately degraded sites, intermediate interventions include introducing desirable species and removing pest ones. Removing unwanted species includes weed spraying for invasive plants. At Scottsdale, the worst weed culprit is African lovegrass, which crowds out the native grasses and forbs. Pest animals overgraze the sensitive grasslands and need to be managed to prevent further degradation.
We have good signs to say that cats are highly destructive. We know that the pigs do an enormous amount of damage. We have large numbers of deer moving in. Our rabbit program has been super successful and has seen great results. They're such selective grazers and they can really reduce diversity and destroy soils. So we do a lot of threat management. Sometimes there's a lot of killing in conservation, I'm afraid.
The third principle is the need for clear, measurable goals. These goals are based on the reference ecosystem and its attributes that were identified in the first principle. Phil already explained the overall goal, and here he explains a sub-goal to restore connectivity.
To restore connectivity across the landscape, it was one of the original intents, and to facilitate that movement of altitudinal migrants. The birds that rely on the coast and the high country need to travel through some intact bushland to get there, and we're providing an important linkage for that to happen across the broader Monero landscape.
Goals allow practitioners to monitor the progress of recovery and modify restoration activities that aren't working. To restore connectivity, Scottsdale needed to restore its corridors of woodland, and to do that, trees need to be planted. At first, survival was poor, so they adapted the method. Now, to give planted trees the best shot at success, the holes are dug with a special auger, the seedlings are planted by hand by volunteers, and each tree is given a tree guard. This takes a lot of work, but the reward is 80 to 90% survival of the seedlings.
What we've found for these soils and for these conditions is that the more energy you put into preparing a site, then the higher survival rate of the plant that you put into it. It's very easy to throw out a lot of plants in small, shallow holes, but your survival rate drops back significantly. And because we're working with people and volunteers who are very invested in this, they want to see the plants and their energy that they're putting into the ground come to fruition, and so having a high survival rate for us is quite important for that reason, and not to waste resources as well. So it's this balance between the resource availability and getting the best survival rate you can do for that.
The fourth principle is to aim for full recovery. Scottsdale is highly degraded, and consequently, its recovery will need high inputs over a long time frame, with significant social and financial investments. Planning restoration projects need to consider the cost and scale to ensure the best possible success.
Sometimes you have to put as much energy back into those places as what was put into that led to their destruction. So it often means herbicides and tractors and diesel fuel, fossil fuels to tip the scale, because in much of those places are locked in like a fixed state of degradation, and you need to kick it out. And sometimes that's a tough gig. It needs a lot of people and a lot of energy and money and support to do it.
The fifth principle is to integrate science and practice. Projects draw on the expertise of practitioners, local stakeholders, especially First Nations people, and scientists.
I think every parcel of land has a unique recipe that needs to be discovered on how to restore it. And what I do here, people say, oh, how do you plant your trees? Well, what I do here is very different from what you might need to do. So I think the best expert is the person who's doing it on their land at that time.
Adaptive management is the formal method of trial and error. When a management technique is implemented, it needs to be monitored to see if the intended outcomes are being met.
The most important thing to me to know is that what I'm doing is making a difference, but I'll only know if it's working, if it's achieving that target, by having some good science to support it. So we do a lot of monitoring across Scottsdale. We work closely with our ecologists to ensure that we're achieving the things that all this management effort is aiming to achieve.
Science is not only about monitoring, but also about actively experimenting and problem solving. At Scottsdale, reintroduction of native plants is a major challenge.
So it's not just about removing the threats such as weed competition. You've got to have something to put back. If there's not natural resilience in the soil, if you don't have a native seed bank, all you're going to do is manage the cycles of weeds. So our focus is starting to really strongly turn to how we're going to put that genetic material, that nativeness, back into the landscape in areas where it's completely depleted. Doing a lot of experimental trials on the reintroduction of native grass seeds and herbs and forbs into the landscape. That's not a well-known, well-developed practice in Australia. Other countries do it better, but in Australia the production of native grass seed for bush regeneration is still very much in its infancy, and so we're trying to do a bunch of trials on how to best grow native grass seed and then reintroduce reintroduce it into bushlands to provide the competition and increase its resilience against further attacks of weeds.
The sixth and final principle is the importance of people. Despite being the sixth principle, stakeholder engagement is the first step in planning a restoration project. Community ownership helps sustain a project in the long term. The project gives stakeholders a deeper connection to place and community and can provide well-being and economic opportunities. Kim Jarvis is a field officer at Scottsdale and manages volunteers.
Volunteers are integral to any of the work that we get done. They're incredibly important. We wouldn't actually get anything of what we needed to get done without them.
In summary, ecological restoration aims to fully restore damaged ecosystems. Using these 6 principles will help practitioners plan and implement restoration projects and strive for the best possible outcomes. For details, see the National Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration in Australia.